In the small dusty town of Njoro, little Amelie was only 3 years old when her life changed forever. Her mother, tired of poverty and desperate for money, made a choice that would haunt her for years. One hot afternoon, she sold her daughter to a passing trader for $500, the price of her own child. The man took the crying girl, disappearing down the dirt road as the mother turned away, pretending not to hear the sobs. The villagers whispered, but soon everyone forgot. Life moved on, except for the little girl who had no one. The trader sold Amelie again, this time to a kind widow in a faraway city called Kasenda. The woman, though poor, raised her with love and care. Amelie grew up watching others live lives she could only dream of, children with families, laughter, schoolbooks, and birthdays. But instead of letting her pain destroy her, she used it to build something greater. She studied hard, learned quickly, and started making soap from herbs and oils at 17. People loved her products, and her small dream began to grow. By the time Amelie turned 25, her name was known across Africa. Her beauty brand became one of the most successful on the continent. Magazines called her a self-made queen, but no one knew the truth, that the woman behind the empire was once a girl sold for $500. The same child her mother had thrown away was now a woman the world would never forget. Amelie was raised by a kind widow named Mama Zuri in the busy city of Kasenda. The old woman found her sick and hungry, wrapped in an old blanket by the roadside, and took her home without a second thought. Mama Zuri had little, but she gave Amelie everything she could: food, care, and a safe place to sleep. Still, as Amelie grew older, she saw how other children had things she didn't: real families, school uniforms, birthday cakes, and parents cheering them on. She often sat by the window, watching them laugh, wondering what it felt like to belong. But Amelie was not one to stay sad for long. She learned early that pain could be power if she used it right. Mama Zuri taught her how to make soap from herbs and oils. What started as a small way to help around the house became her secret passion. At 17, Amelie began selling her soaps at the local market. People loved them. They said her soaps made their skin glow and smell like flowers after rain. She saved every coin she earned, dreaming of something bigger. With time, her small idea grew into a brand. She named it Amelie Naturals, after herself, the name that once meant nothing now printed on every bottle. By 25, she owned factories, employed hundreds of women, and her products were sold across Africa. Her face appeared on billboards and magazine covers, and people called her the beauty queen of Kasenda. But no one knew the truth behind her smile. Behind the fame and success was still the memory of a crying little girl who had once been sold for $500. She carried that secret in her heart, not as shame, but as strength. Every time she looked in the mirror, she didn't just see a successful woman, she saw the proof that no past is powerful enough to destroy a determined heart. Amelie had turned her pain into purpose, and her story was only just beginning. It was a hot, sticky afternoon in Kasenda. The air smelled of perfume, paper, and power. Amelie sat in a glass office high above the city, signing a new deal worth millions. Cameras flashed, reporters smiled, and her team clapped as she shook hands with investors. She had everything she once prayed for: success, money, and respect. Yet in the middle of all the noise, something small caught her attention. A newspaper on the table. A picture on the front page. She froze. It was an old photo from a story about an upcoming property auction in Njoro. But Amelie didn't see the headline, she saw a face. Wrinkled, angry, shouting behind a cracked wooden door. Her heart stopped. That face was burned into her memory. Her mother. The woman who had sold her for $500. The same house behind her in the photo was the one Amelie remembered, the one with the broken roof, the small yard where she had once played, and the kitchen where she used to cry for food. She stared at the picture for a long time. Her assistant asked if she was okay, but Amelie only nodded, her eyes distant. She felt a strange mix of pain and calm. Years had passed, and life had changed her, but the sight of that woman brought back everything, the hunger, the fear, the loneliness. Yet, instead of anger, she felt a deep, quiet strength. She realized she didn't need revenge. She had already won by surviving, by becoming everything her mother thought she'd never be. That night, she sat alone by her window, the city lights glowing around her. She looked at the photo again. The same woman who had thrown her away was now struggling to keep the house she once sold her from. Life had come full circle. Amelie smiled faintly, wiped a tear from her cheek, and whispered, "Maybe it's time to go home." But this time, she wouldn't be the lost child, she would return as the woman who owned everything that once tried to break her. That night, Amelie couldn't sleep. The image of her mother standing behind that cracked door kept flashing in her mind. The same woman who had sold her like an object was now desperate to save the very house she once traded her from. But Amelie didn't feel pity, only a quiet decision rising inside her. She called her lawyer and said calmly, "Buy that house in Njoro. Don't tell anyone it's me." Within hours, the deal was done. The house that had once been her prison now belonged to her. The next morning, the sun was sharp over the dusty streets of Njoro. The town hadn't changed much, the same rusted roofs, the same curious eyes behind half-closed windows. Then, a black luxury car rolled slowly down the narrow road and stopped right in front of the old house. The engine went silent, and the whole neighborhood froze. Cameras followed as Amelie stepped out, tall and graceful, diamonds sparkling on her wrist, her perfume cutting through the dusty air. People whispered, "Who is she? A movie star? A minister's wife?" No one recognized the little girl who had once cried for food on that same street. Inside, her mother was yelling at the tenants to pack their things. When she heard the commotion outside, she stormed out, ready to fight whoever had come to take her house. But the moment her eyes met Amelie's, she stopped cold. Her mouth fell open. Her hands trembled. She saw the face she had forgotten, older now, stronger, glowing with quiet power. Amelie looked at her without a word. Her calmness cut deeper than anger ever could. For a moment, time stood still. The crowd watched as the woman who had sold her daughter faced the daughter who now owned her house. The mother's voice broke into a whisper, "Amelie." But the girl she once sold was no longer a child, she was a queen standing in diamonds, and her silence said everything. Amelie stood still for a moment, the quiet heavy between them. The crowd around watched in silence, unsure of what was happening. Her mother's eyes darted from the car to the cameras, then back to Amelie. She opened her mouth to speak, but Amelie raised her hand slightly, stopping her. From her bag, she pulled out a folded envelope and stepped closer. The sound of her heels on the dirt road echoed in the air. Without a word, she handed the papers to the old woman, the deed to the house. Her mother frowned, confused, staring at the documents. "You sold me for $500, Amelie said softly. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled just slightly. "This house cost me $200,000. Her words hit like thunder, quiet, but impossible to ignore. "You live here no more." Her mother blinked in disbelief. At first, she gave a nervous laugh, thinking it was some kind of joke, maybe a cruel prank. "Amelie, my child," she said, trying to smile, "you can't be serious." But when she looked into Amelie's eyes, those same eyes she had once looked away from, she saw no anger, no tears, just cold, unshakable truth. The neighbors gasped softly as they realized who this woman was, the lost daughter, the one who had been sold and never seen again. Her mother's laughter faded into silence. The color drained from her face. She tried to speak again, but no words came. Amelie turned slightly, nodding to the movers behind her. They walked past, carrying boxes and furniture out of the house, piece by piece, as the old woman stood frozen in the doorway. Amelie didn't shout, didn't cry. She only watched, her expression steady. It wasn't revenge she felt, it was release. She had carried that pain for too long, and now, standing there, she was free. Her mother finally dropped to her knees, her voice shaking, "Please. I'm sorry." But Amelie only looked down at her and whispered, "It's too late. Some debts can't be paid back." As the movers began carrying furniture out of the house, Amelie stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and memories. Every corner of the small house seemed to whisper her name, the walls that had once heard her cry, the floor that had felt her tiny bare feet. She walked slowly, touching the old wooden table, the cracked walls, the window where she used to sit and wait for food that never came. Each step was like walking through time. Her heart felt heavy, but her face stayed calm. She was no longer that little girl. She had come back not as a victim, but as the woman who owned everything that once broke her. Behind her, her mother's voice cracked through the air. "Amelie. Amelie, please," she cried, falling to her knees. Her voice shook as she begged, "Forgive me, my child, I was young, I was desperate." Tears rolled down her face, mixing with the dust as she crawled toward her daughter. For the first time in decades, she said her daughter's name, not in anger, not in shame, but in regret. The neighbors stood outside, watching in silence, the truth unfolding in front of them like a movie. But this was no movie. The cameras that followed Amelie weren't there to humiliate her mother, they were there for something bigger. Amelie had agreed to film her story for a documentary called The Price of a Daughter. She wanted the world to see what pain could become when it's met with courage. This moment wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. As her mother cried, Amelie turned toward the camera for a brief moment. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She whispered softly, "Some stories aren't meant to be hidden." Then she walked toward the door, leaving her mother behind, her sobs echoing through the empty rooms. The movers continued their work, packing away every trace of the woman who had once traded her child for money. And as Amelie stepped outside into the sunlight, she felt the weight of her past lift, replaced by something far greater, freedom. Outside the gate, the sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky orange and gold. The whole neighborhood stood quietly, watching Amelie. Some whispered, others just stared, unsure if what they were seeing was real. The woman who had once been sold like a thing was now leaving as someone untouchable, someone powerful. Amelie stopped for a moment at the gate and looked back at the house, the place where her life had begun and where it had once been stolen from her. For years, she had dreamed of this day, but now that it was here, she felt no anger. Just peace. Behind her, her mother's cries broke through the air. "Amelie," she screamed, her voice cracking with pain. "You can't do this. I gave you life." The words came out desperate, filled with guilt and fear. The neighbors gasped, waiting for Amelie to answer. Slowly, Amelie turned around. Her eyes were calm, her face strong but soft. She looked at the woman who had birthed her and sold her, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Then she gave a faint, almost sad smile. "No," she said quietly, her voice steady and clear. "You didn't give me life. You sold it." The words hung in the air like a truth too heavy to ignore. Her mother covered her face and sobbed loudly, her cries echoing through the street. But Amelie didn't move. She took one last look at the house, then turned toward her car. The cameras flashed as she stepped inside. The soft thud of the car door closing sounded like the end of a long, painful chapter. As the car drove away, dust rose behind her, slowly fading into the wind. Amelie leaned back in her seat, eyes closed, a calm smile on her face. It wasn't the end of pain, it was the beginning of freedom. She had walked away not as a broken child, but as a woman who had reclaimed every piece of herself that the world tried to take. That night, the world couldn't stop talking about her. Every news channel, every blog, every social page had the same headline: "The girl sold for $500 now owns the house she was sold from." Photos of Amelie standing in front of the small house flooded the internet. Some people called her heartless. Others called her a hero. But no one could deny the power of her story. A woman once forgotten by the world had risen so high that even her past couldn't reach her anymore. While the headlines spread like fire, Amelie sat alone in her quiet apartment, looking out over the city lights. Her phone buzzed with calls, messages, and interview requests, but she ignored them all. She wasn't looking for fame. She hadn't done it for attention. She had done it for the little girl she used to be, the one who cried herself to sleep, wondering why she wasn't enough. That night, Amelie didn't feel victorious, she felt free. The world called it revenge, but Amelie knew it was something else entirely. It was justice, quiet, powerful, and long overdue. She didn't destroy her mother's life, she simply took back what was stolen from hers. Sometimes justice doesn't come with fire or anger. Sometimes it comes with silence, paperwork, and a calm smile. As she finally turned off her phone, Amelie whispered to herself, "This isn't revenge. It's closure." She thought about the girl she once was, hungry, scared, and unloved, and smiled softly. Because sometimes, the child who was thrown away doesn't just come back home to be seen. She comes back owning the keys, walking through the same doors that once closed on her, not as a victim, but as the author of her own ending.